truth, the actual truth, the reality of what's happening is outing itself all over the world. So let me give you an example. A few years ago, we covered this residential school story up in Canada. So let's go up there again. Let's go back to the formerly Catholic country of Canada, beautifully Catholic country of Canada, which now is a Catholic wasteland, okay? Walter will throw on the screen here this headline: Canada is pulling funds from groups still searching for alleged bodies buried at Indigenous residential schools funded by Catholics and other evil Christians, right? A committee of experts formed to search for the elusive remains of the children eaten and destroyed and raped by Catholic priests and nuns. That committee has lost its funding following 4 years of searches that have found 0 bodies, no remains of children at the residential schools. So let's review, because we already did several programs on this. Lots of you got very upset about this. And as I said at the time, whether abuses, whether there's human nature involved, yes, there were abuses, but we're talking about the systematic use of residential Catholic schools to harm children, to rape children, and then to kill children, and then to bury them in mass graves, right? So based on that bit of fake news, up in Canada, they burned 50 Catholic churches to the ground, all over Canada, based on this empty accusation that even the Canadian government now is admitting was empty. So we remember the stories where the experts, the scientists, the academics were using ground-penetrating radar, right? And they said they found graves, when in fact what they found were septic systems, sewers. So this is literally a load of crap, this story. Exactly as we said it was at the time. Just accept the narrative, don't ask any questions. Basically, it goes something like this. This is what you need to know. Residential schools were run by people who kill children. Catholic priests ran some of those residential schools. Therefore, all Catholic priests killed children. That's basically it. That's all you need to know.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, that woke flake, didn't question a word of this story. He said it actually showed a dark and shameful chapter in Canadian history, told the Catholic Church to step up. But now it seems the so-called bodies detected by this activist are just radar findings of tree roots and other soil disturbances.
There is actually no evidence at all that these are the graves of students who died at residential school. So there is actually nothing to this story about mass graves or unmarked graves. Until we get some positive evidence, the story should be completely discounted.
Keep in mind as we move through this, they're not just talking about abuse that's the problem with the residential school. But the larger issue here is that what we're really talking about, which is why we're doing such a long program on this tonight, is because what Francis is doing is contributing and endorsing the movement that's been knocking down Christopher Columbus statues down here in the States for how long? A long time. Rewriting history. And once again, you see the role that Catholics who have totally lost their identity, post-Vatican II Catholics are playing in all of this. The little Catholic ferret, just like Joe the Catholic Biden doing his part, right? He was right there, Trudeau, right there at the time to hold the coats of those who would stone the Catholic Church. I'd still prefer to have Joey Biden than a little ferret up in Canada. I mean, Joe Rogan this past week absolutely nailed it.
Canada is communist. They got to get rid of that guy. And then during the pandemic, I'm like, oh, you're a dictator. Yeah, he's gross. He's a sketchy guy.
That pretty much sums it up. But now it's time for Francis to drag the Catholic Church through the mud one more time. Because after all, the little ferret wants him to.
I have spoken personally, directly, with His Holiness Pope Francis to impress upon him how important it is, not just that he makes an apology, but that he makes an apology to Indigenous Canadians on Canadian soil.
All right, so let's just talk about it. I know nobody else is talking about this because you're not allowed to talk about this, but let's talk about this whole residential school thing this time. We had a show on this a while ago. And I realize it's racist. It's absolutely racist to ask any questions about what's really going on because they're indigenous peoples, and so you have no right to ask any questions. It's racist! Just shut up and accept the narrative spoon-fed to you on TV, right? Just like COVID was, Ukraine, climate emergency, and everything else. Just accept the narrative, don't ask any questions. And naturally, and tragically, maybe most heartbreaking of all, the successor of St. Peter, Pope Francis, was right there happy to oblige, to apologize for Catholic priests and nuns who were doing their best to fulfill God, our Lord's command to go out and baptize all nations, convert all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Francis right there to apologize for that. The vicar of Jesus Christ on earth, supposedly, essentially apologizing. He's going to get the largest stage he can possibly find. He's going to be in an airplane. He's going to have, an entourage. And he's apologizing for those who brought Christ, the Lumen Christi, into the darkness of the pagan world, of the new world. Is you ever think you're going to live to see this? Now, that's what was going on. And as we pointed out at the time, it didn't matter what the indigenous people themselves were saying, right? Because there were a lot of indigenous people who had gone through those schools, and they didn't agree at all that this with Francis's take on what the missionary priests and nuns had done, right? But now that we see what happened with the story, you can say, well, yeah, nobody actually cared about the indigenous people, did they? They were shutting them up. Because who cares about indigenous people who are speaking the truth when there's virtue signaling to be done? And wouldn't it be fun, once again, to ask a few questions? Because there are certainly plenty of witnesses out there among the tribes, among the indigenous peoples of Canada, who are wanting to tell the other side of the story.
Concert pianist, librettist, novelist, and playwright, Thompson Highway's life has taken him from the trap lines of northern Manitoba to the stages of the world. His plays are studied at universities all over North America, and he has almost single-handedly created a vibrant and viable native theatre in Canada. I would think that your life, your adult life, would be more informed by what was probably the dichotomy of your early years, the more exaggerated extremes, I would think, than most people would have. Idyllic to start with, certainly less than idyllic as it became later when you were in a residential school.
Oh, that's a mistake.
Is that right?
The residential school experience for me was a fantastic experience.
Is that right?
So much of that is reported, that's skewed. It's not quite right. They don't have the whole picture. There was a lot of us who had positive experiences at the native residential school.
But I've got to say, surprised when you say that the residential experience was a good one for you.
Yeah, it was. I learned how to speak English.
Yeah.
I learned how to play the piano.
That started at residential school, the piano thing.
Oh, yeah.
Why doesn't he get to tell his side of the story? There's plenty of those people up there. None of them get to be heard, though. They don't have a voice because it doesn't fit the narrative. Now, you see how indignant this guy is? Like, wait a minute. No, that's wrong. That's fake news. I went through there. Don't you dare make a victim out of me. They taught me how to play the piano. They taught me English. They taught me about Jesus Christ. They made me who I am today, right? Now, we let those guys speak because that's what we do down here. It's too bad nobody else did. Because now, 3 years later, what do we got? No mass graves. The investigation is over, but the damage is done. The propaganda worked. And with the exception of a tiny remnant of believers, Catholic Canada is in the MAID program, medical assistance in dying, right? Because so many people up there were like, oh my gosh, was that what the Catholics were doing? Ooh, these Catholic priests, as we pointed out at the time, these missionaries were traveling, just devoting their lives to trying to give an education to the indigenous people. They were just a bunch of monsters, a bunch of sexual abusers of children. Well, and they walked away from the Catholic Church. Do you blame them? And this, friends, is going on all over the world right now, all over the Catholic world. This goes back to what we were just talking about with Cardinal Dolan, because nobody has Catholic identity. Nobody knows Catholic history. They don't know their own beliefs. They don't know what they actually have to believe anymore. You see? That's the crisis. Hey, Michael Matt here. Did you know that there's more to Remnant TV than just the TV? Check out our newspaper. It's been coming out every 2 weeks since 1967. Click the link below, subscribe to that.